guys to our workshop. Today should be a good discussion about Chris. It's I stated a few other people. I've been on this mission for a few years, and this has been a topic for a number of years. So I'm excited about some progress that we're going to share with you today. It's I think a lot of work has been done, and it's been relatively quiet in providing updates and information, but you'll see after today a lot of information or a lot of work has been truly done. It's showed and noticed and appreciated. On the agenda today, we've got a few topics. As far as questions, we've opened it up to allow questions to come in, via email, which the monitor got there, and then we're going to have opportunities after each section. There's 4 sections after each section to answer questions from you folks in the audience today. So it's a relatively small group today. I think it's been a good show if we go around and do introductions. I'll start. Brian Grant's the chair of the commission, and I represent the public. Start down there. It's all the way. It doesn't matter if you're a commissioner or not.
I'm Brave Longwood. I'm a dean at Cal State LA, an archaeologist by training, but I represent archaeology here.
Katie Connor, I'm staff counsel.
I'm Jody Brown. I'm the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer for California.
I'm one of the Adams from down Eagle in Sierra County, and I also represent the public on the commission.
Good morning, Adam Stroh. I represent archaeology on the commission. I live in Culver City, and I work for the Southern California Edison.
Good morning, I'm Jen Hansen. I'm the vice chair of the commission. I live in Palm Springs, and I represent history.
My name is Alan Hess. I represent architecture on the commission, and I live in Irvine, California.
My name is Luis Hoyos. I cover architectural history at President San Dimas, and I'm retired.
Yeah, it's just a small group. We're going to have a healthy discussion, so that's going to who's here, right?
Anne Marie, I'm the immediate past president of the Society of California Archaeology.
Joseph McDowell, data manager, California Office of Historic Preservation.
Eric Allison, Department of Parks and Recreation IT Division, in the Project Management Office, and I'm working on the CRIS project, and I'm also a former CRIS coordinator from years gone by.
Jay Correa, registration unit at OHP, 2 feet out the door. So
William Berg, registration unit, commission staff.
Amy Crane, historian, registration unit, commission staff.
James Tafiz, graduate student intern with the OHP.
Welcome.
Good morning, Brian Lynch, Northwest Information Center coordinator.
I'm Kurt. I supervise the archaeologists for Section 16 archaeologists in California. I'm also the Chris coordinator.
Carla Lane, I'm the technical business specialist at PE.
David Nichols, park archaeologist in Mojave National Preserve, National Park Service.
Great. One more just quick introduction.
Peter Gavan, archaeologist for
Monica.
Monica Newman, executive secretary at Leland.
All right, great. Again, thank you everyone for attending. We're just going to do a brief intro, and then we're going to turn it over to Adam to provide some background content.
Okay. So what we're going to be discussing today, or using as a basis for discussion, is the CRIS single system report that was prepared by OHP and sent to the commission on January 17, 2024. I believe it is available on our website. Folks want to take a look at it on the commission website. It addresses several questions that have been posed about the single system and the inventory. Basically, the questions that have been addressed was what is an inventory? Provided an overview of the single system effort, which is a grant / contract that OHP, working with the California Department of Technology, has got a contract, has a contract to help develop the CRIS system. on its signal system on the merchant's platform. What the report also provided was what we anticipate we have at the end of that year-long contract, what numbers we can continue after that contract is ended, what is full integration and what tasks are needed for full integration into the system, the status of CRIS digitization, and then finally, some remarks and information about the archaeological resource database and the art and the built environment. The built environment resources database.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And thanks everybody for showing up. I informed quite a few people that we were going to be talking about CRIS today. There is a committee that was stood up as part of this commission to create workshops to make the commissioners more informed on how we can do a better job reviewing nominations and be more of a cohesive unit, understand how each of our specific skill sets are combined to represent the state for those responsibilities we have. We always talk about doing a CRIS workshop, and it was originally just to walk people who don't understand or use the CRIS system, the California Historic Resource Information System, on a regular basis. And so if you're not part of that user community and you're a commissioner and we talk about the CRIS, we felt you should be more informed on what those functions are. However, some information has been generated over the last year that has changed the nature and context of the CRIS workshop into what we have today. So a little less than a year ago, we brought some concerns from the user community to this commission and put them into the public record that, you know, the effort is out there, things are happening behind the scenes. We'd like to know more about it. We'd like to understand what is the effort to create a single system, which has a number of different names that, you know, no one's settling on anything right now, and nomenclature is something we can get into in a bit, but I've personally spoken to Brian and to Scarlett and her colleagues and to Dave and a number of other agency folks, and I know Anne Marie is very dialed into this just from a user effort that we want to understand what the state's doing with this data set and how to make it more readily accessible to qualified individuals who will need it for project planning purposes moving forward. It's an important effort. And so that feedback was brought to this commission, questions were asked, and then they went back and put some answers together and waited for that contract to be awarded, and then generated the 6-page report that is now posted. So today's workshop will be a read of that report into the public record, but we'll break it into pieces, and we'll do it per agenda item. So we'll hit each agenda item in the corresponding section in that report, and then we'll stop and we'll open it up for discussion. We'll work with Amy to see if there are any questions related to each of those topics to make sure that the people who are watching online and may have submitted questions in advance or during can get their questions answered. And I think it's okay to open it up to the floor for questions as well. But yes?
And we already have one comment that someone is unable to hear the speakers clearly on YouTube. You are too far away from the microphone.
Which is where exactly? Okay.
Project.
I can project. I can project as much as I can, and maybe check in a couple minutes and see if that's better. That's okay. So before we get started with reading, that's the context. We had questions, they were answered. We have a report. I think it's great. And I'd like to say before getting started that everyone who contributed to this report, this update, is amazing. It's better than we've seen in a long, long time. And the last time we had an open forum like this on the CRIS, I believe, was under Carol Romanelli's administration at the State Park Museum Archives, and that was 2013 or 14. So it's been about 10 years since we've talked about the CRIS in this type of format, and I'm excited to do it again. And I hope they heard that. Right?
We did.
All right, I'd like to open up any questions on the structure from the commission before we dive in.
Do we have any copies of any of the?
Monica, do you have copies of the actual report? It's electronic, but I know Monica's awesome because she's got hard copies on her. Yes. No. That's, yeah. All right. Yes.
Is that your, now, something that we put in the chat group? So they won't have to hear it. Is that URL public?
I believe so. I believe it's on the commission website, on OHP's website.
The workshop materials?
Yeah, the report. out.
No, they're not online.
They're not. No. Okay. Can we place it online at some point in the future?
Potentially, yes.
Yes, is the answer. Thanks, Mark. Good question. All right. Any other questions before we dive in? Okay, so I'm going to skip the definitions for now and get right into a brief overview of the single system, which is 3A1 on your agenda. So the primary parties involved in this effort are the Office of Historic Preservation, Department of Parks and Recreation, IT, the Chris Information Centers, and the California Department of Technology, and Fairlawn, which is the contract award recipient. So here's the overview. The OHP is developing a single system to automate and integrate business and workflow processes used at OHP and the 9 information centers. The OHP Automation Project, which in other documents has been referred to as the modernization effort, the digitization effort. There's different ways of referring to it, and somebody will decide the final name, but just know that those are all kind of interchangeable at the moment. Funded by the California Department of Technology, Technology Modernization Fund, TMF for short grant, was awarded to Fairlawn and was executed at the end of October 2023. The term of the grant contract is 1 year through October 22nd, 2024. DPR has agreed to host the enterprise system based on the Arches open source data management platform through its Microsoft Azure cloud environment. It's a big mouthful of IT, so I want to make sure that everybody heard that. I'm going to read it one more time because I think that's an important sentence. Department of Parks and Recreation has agreed to host the enterprise system, that single source system that we talked about, based on the Arches open source data management platform through its Microsoft Azure cloud environment. Azure or Azure? Azure. How's it pronounced?
Azure.
Azure. Thank you. Thank you.
A-Z-U-R-E-C.
Good, thank you. The tasks include identify stakeholder user type workflows, define the data management workflows from the OHP and the ICs, develop the data model to support the system, define and identify system integrations, reporting, notifications, templates, and dashboards. Extract the OHP and IC data, transfer and load into the Arches platform. Develop, configure, and customize Arches to support the data management. Test and modify the Arches system to ensure integration and smooth interactions by the end user. Smooth interactions. Develop, report, and dashboard tools. Develop report and dashboard tools. Test mobile data collection application on iOS and Android operating systems, which means that there will be a mobile app for access to the system. Tracking is great. Training and knowledge transfer to DPR, OHP, and CRIS. want to stop there because that was a lot of information and find out, number one, are there any questions from a commissioner on what those tasks include? Amy, are there any questions online so far?
No.
Can they hear
No one has said otherwise.
me? Great. I have a question because it talked about training. And it talked about training for those stakeholders, but I'd like to, I don't know, do we have Scribe to maybe put some questions down to bring back? Is that possible? Maybe Jody, can we find out if training also includes user training or some sort of job aid for what the user community would need to learn in order to access and use the system functionally? What will we have at the end of the contract? I'm on page 3, top of page 3. And there's some overlap here with some of the agenda items, but I want to just read this in and then we could move to, this is kind of A2, but we'll just keep going. The contract with Fairlawn Geographics to design and implement the new system, including transfer of data into it, is structured to allow for a period of information collection and assessment and system design leading up to mid-March 2024. At that time, OHP will evaluate the information at hand and the project status to determine what functionality is needed in the new system to ensure completion by October 2024, when the contract expires. This will be balanced against time and resources spent on moving data into the new system, extract, transfer, and load, ETL. By March 2024, more will be known about the level of effort for the ETL, work across 9 ICs and at OHP. Due to the complexity and volume of data involved, it is not possible to understand adequately the condition of the data set as it affects the level of effort needed for that extract, transfer, and load until completion of the assessment of the data. So it's the state of the data. Understanding more about what that data looks like will give us a better idea about the level of effort from Fairlawn to enter it into the system. What data is available at the end of the year? The ETL work and the establishment of a single statewide CRIS inventory are of the highest priority in the project. At the end of the year-long grant contract, the new system will have all available digital CRIS, and that's IC and OHP inventory data housed within it. What data is available at the end of the year depends on what condition the data are in relative to rules for integrity and completeness in the new system. Data that is not part of the CRIS inventory or related workflows will not be included in this phase of implementation. Basic functionality will be implemented in order for the data to be managed and used in the new system at the end of the contract. Existing external user access will be, at a minimum, at the same level as today. Training will be provided and training information made readily available so that new and existing internal users of the system will be sufficiently familiar with it to use it effectively. Post-implementation, improvements and additions to the system after the end of the contract will be made as needed. DPR will be hosting the system within its Microsoft Azure cloud environment. All right, so that's what they have to do between now and the end of the contract. I don't think these are stretch goals. It's lofty. There's a lot to do, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we have scope that's part of the contract that we can measure success against. I say we, the university, I'm just reading this. I know that OHP staff and DPR and everyone else involved, the stakeholders are the ones who are going to be doing all this. We're just kind of relaying the information to you, but it's more than what I feel we've had in a long, long time. So I'll stop right there and ask if there are any questions at the commission level.
I have a basic question, which you can't see.
Make sure you speak up.
Oh, yeah. Teaching voice. So the between the contractor and the Chris staff, I assume it's an assumption I have chosen arches. So they already know that arches will provide the graphic environment that is useful, that works. That's assumption one. Right? So I hope that that's true. And then, is there a mechanism for ongoing coordination to do changes? If changes are required, how often that coordination? Does it matter? I mean, once a month, after a year, once the year is gone and the contract has been paid, cooperation is sometimes difficult.
So, I'm sorry, I just want to clarify, are you asking during this year period, are we coordinating and meeting?
I assume that my second, I assume that that's going to happen.
It is not.
But I've heard in my own limited way that Arch is very good and that it's flexible and that no reason to doubt that that's the correct answer. But it's encouraging, I think, that the year contract started with so much agreement, right? We'll be working with this software. So my only question was, has everybody agreed?
Yes, that is where we're going, the direction we're going, that was the decision made by the department and,
Thank you.
You to ask a question. But I think the question that stems out of that is ongoing, once this contract is done, ongoing, training for any changes. My understanding, is correct me if I'm right, my understanding is that part of the assessment in this contract will evaluate what and recommend what additional training is needed as an ongoing maintenance program after this year contract is done.
so we will need to, continue maintenance on it, and if there, because it does have a lot of flexibility, there would be needing to do additions or changes to it. And so we will need to have ongoing, I'm not sure exactly how we're going to do it, but we are going to need that and to keep track and ensure that we're keeping things up to date and making sure that it's feasible for everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, I think my question is maybe a little more basic and for Jimmy or. I'm just a little bit confused about what exactly is going into the system. And I know it says only was it restricted because of our discussions over the years of ongoing digitization and the fact that some records are not already digitized. What exactly are they putting in here? And does this scope of work include, from this point on, once it's functioning, for everything else to go into the system?
So because of the limitations of the year-long contract, the plan is whatever is already in the ICPs, and that will come through the ETL process. And anything within our OHP and footage that's already digitized, that will be the focus.
That's like the
Right,
core of
the
it.
core of it.
Okay.
We're limited on time. Yeah, there's a lot of other items that we put into this, and that would be something that would happen after this first implementation.
Okay. So then that would be an ongoing task. It says it has before, but it will be at least in everybody sort of input data into the same system, right? Which is part of the advantage of that. But then, and I know this included workflows, so again, will this first phase be part of building the ability from this point forward for things to be in digital format and then automatically put into the system, or is that a next phase?
Well, I think it will be developed so that we are able to input additional information after this first year. And then, you know, as you well know, there's opportunities to develop additional methods and I'm not an IT person, I can't really speak to exactly what it's called, but to be able to supplement and put in whatever new data and how we're going to access it. Is that what you're asking?
Yes. I'm just, is there a broader definition of what the ultimate goal is of information to have in there? I'm thinking, for example, and I know there were several things defined in the materials we have in terms of the duties of the commission with regard to creating an inventory. Most of the references are to things that are state, national, things that are under, you know, the purview of OHP. Is there a broader definition of what to do with all of those citywide surveys and things that don't always get submitted to you, but they do if they're through a certified local government grant? So you would have those records which have been putting into the CRIS system. I'm just thinking about, like, you know, bigger picture of the universe with so many surveys being done. You know, I'm obviously more on the built environment side, not archaeology, but with so many new surveys being done, you know, is there any definition of how those are, or will they and need to be integrated?
I think we're going to have that as a future discussion. We haven't, right now, we're just trying to, you know, get the first information together, but yeah, definitely, I know you and I've talked about that before.
Yeah.
Something to consider, which I probably makes sense to put it into nice.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, really, my example would be the city of Los Angeles, the citywide survey that was done. Speak up, okay, thought I was being very loud. Sorry, the citywide survey that Los Angeles completed a few years back, and Los Angeles is actually using Arch's software. They were one of the largest batches of information that the Arches, when they were developing Arches, that they used. And one of the advantages now is that for Arches, they developed and used terminology that is used by the state of California and the National Register in terms of fields. So a lot of that information is readily available. But so then you have, in the past, citywide surveys were incorporated into the inventory. Now you have municipal and county governments creating their own databases and their own systems so that you don't necessarily have to incorporate it into a statewide system. And I know that's hard to manage with all of the cities, counties in LA. I mean, LA has the advantage of using Arches, so we potentially need, you know, a way of accessing data from Los Angeles through Arches, which would probably be way in the future. But anyway, just some thoughts. I'm sort of, having worked on that project for so many years, long-range thinking about how this is going to work. We just sort of need to understand that upfront to get to that endpoint eventually.
Other questions from the table? I know in my read, we'll go to the questions here in just a second. In my read of this report and what we understand to be how a single system operates is that more than likely there will be a standard for data submission, whether it's a certain schema that all GIS must be created under and then submitted. That would create, it would remove the divide between archaeology and built environment. You submit your shape in that format and it gets uploaded. And so standardization of data input and data output, I think, is something at the state level that the system is probably going to generate as part of just its standard functionality, so that the user community, as well as internally, would make it a very simple process to go in and out. And we've got people who know this way better than I do in this room right now, so I'm gonna, if it's okay, open it up to some questions from the room. Can I go with Emery first and then Dave? Okay, thank you, Emery.
So I'm here representing Society for California Archaeology. We have almost 1,300 members now who are all users of the CRIS. Our members are the ones who are using the data and generating the data that's going into the CRIS. I think I heard you say that there's stakeholders who will be involved in this. And if I heard that correctly, how does one become a stakeholder? Did I hear that correctly?
The stakeholders at the beginning were part of they were listed as being part of this effort. And your question is, how do you add to that list?
But if I'm somebody who's using the CRIS data, how do I get involved in making sure that this is going to be a system that I as an end user can actually use?
Right, so I don't know if my answer is the accurate one, but I have a response. The second part of this agenda is understanding whether the commission would like to stand up a committee to be part of the CRIS conversion or the other terms that were described for this effort. And my guess is that if we do set up that committee, that we could then define what the purview is of that committee, including outreach to bring in other stakeholders. Now, I don't know the formal versus informal stakeholders, whether there's informational, consulted, responsible, accountable, there's ways of describing a stakeholder's input, but my goal, if we do get votes to stand up a committee, is to provide an outreach function for that community you just described.
Okay. Thank you. So stay tuned.
Thanks.
I had a second question. I'm sure you gave a very high-level summary. So is it safe to say that security rules are going to be part of this? Because confidentiality is obviously a huge concern.
So yeah, data governance and everything else is built into the contract. There's actually a little bit more about that in here further down in the report that we haven't gotten to yet. But yeah, and I think we may leave this room with a number of questions like that, because if we had all the details, we're fairly new into the contract, and there's an element of discovery that's part of the contract as well, like the state of the data, but it's been talked about for a long time, the confidentiality and the laws and regulations attached to that. So that won't be ignored.
I imagine there's a lot of folks out there who that would be their very first question, so just take that off the table.
Yeah, it won't be ignored, I'm sure. And I'm going to go back to Janet and Dave.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up comment on that, arches, and you can all look at, go to the website, thearchesproject.org, and it talks about the history of the software and who all the users are all over the world of the software. It started as an archaeology database, so they're really, really aware of the need for security of that information. So I'm sure that'll be integral or integrated into the system.
Thanks. Dave, patiently.
So in the National Park Service, we have what you were referring to. We maintain our own database, and it's built environments, and it's cultural landscapes, and it's predominantly archaeology. And the last time that I attempted to submit a stack of new site records to Chris, it was apparent to me that it went through at least 2 individuals for review. And the amount of editing and extra required documentation requests that came back to the park was actually more work intensive than the work it took to go to the site and document the site. And so we quit doing it because we didn't have the capacity at that time. So bringing this to a practical level, because we've been talking about like high ideals about what this system's supposed to look like, I'm hoping and imagining that it looks like me at my National Park Service office being able to directly enter data in a system that's self-editing as you go through. So if you're not putting in the correct data that is required, it won't let you go, right? It'll give you back and say you don't have this. And then does that mean, if that is the ideal, then all these grad students that are sitting there editing all these site records that are coming in, is that they're gonna go away? I mean, these are just practical questions.
I understand, and I'm glad we're asking them because those are the things that the people who are designing the system will want to know. So, I mean, if you think about, you can't move to the next page for, filling out the application.
Right, if I know what these things are as I'm going along, rather than get my site records bounced 3 times over a 6-month period.
Right.
I mean, you can see how that's just.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of feedback that outreach to the user community, that's important, right? As we're designing the system, it would be much easier, probably less costly to build in those elements of the system as you're constructing it initially and going back and making changes. Now, again, nobody at this table is part of designing the system, but I think the user community perspective is valuable, which is why we're having the workshop. So.
Because our database is set up that way.
Sure.
So you can't screw it up, because if you do, it tells you you screwed it up, then you can't move forward to publish that record in its final form.
Good points. Thanks.
I'm kind of on the scale. This digitization problem, I presume, is digitizing each individual item within the EPR form, P3P, resource attributes, there'll be fields for each of these items.
So I'm not sure, we don't have the data on the attribute table contents or whether the schema includes specific fields. Do you guys have that information?
I mean, I can answer that, but yeah, Eric and the project manager.
Do you want to try to give an answer to that, Eric?
Well, I didn't hear the full question, but I think I understand, so sorry. The contractor currently is working with the schema we're using at OHB currently, as well as the information center database, which has the IC database has more of the not full, but it has the DPR 523 oriented data. OHB has other kinds of data, so we're going to come up with a schema that adapts to both sets of workflows, and decisions about specific fields and such, we're not there yet. I don't know, is that sufficient for this time, or?
More or less, will this then be replacing DDR? Where we've come up with a digitization, right? But nothing has been digitized yet for this. Right? Last year was talking about the GIS interface to access the records.
Well, no, I mean, I think digitization has been ongoing at all 9 ICs, so no one's starting from scratch. But if we're scanning PDFs, okay.
That's a great question.
So the question, let's make sure everybody hears it, is what is the definition of digitization? And we're going to bring that back with us and make sure that we have a proper definition for that. And it's a workshop, right? We're going to get information. We might not have the answers, but we've got the brightest minds of the land in the room to at least go back and try to answer those. So, yes, Amy.
I have several questions from one user. Would you like me to read them all, or do you want to take them one at a time?
Any good ones? Well, I mean, let's get a couple.
Okay. The first is about getting a copy of the 6-page report, and it sounds like that is under discussion for.
I believe Jody's response is we can post it online.
Yes, I think it's okay.
Yeah, so it's a public document and it will be posted.
Okay. Will there be a single way to submit resources and records to the new system? Right now, every IC has a different means of submitted resources and records, and some are extra difficult, like the SCCIC, which doesn't have the process for submitting data on their website. You have to email them and ask how to do it, and then they email you a PDF with instructions. SCIC takes submissions online, nice and easy, and another unit uses a Dropbox system.
Thank you for that question. Eric, I'm assuming that data input will be standardized, and there will be a single way to do it rather than however many ways there are today. Is that a safe assumption?
Well, to a point, having a single system is going to impose standardization up to a certain level on OHP and the ICs. So the processing will involve the same steps using the same system for the ICs. As to, I'm just trying to be careful not to overshoot with my answers. I don't want to be,
No one's holding you to the answers
Well,
today.
I am. So as to submittal of paper documents or PDFs and such and so forth, as my role right now, I'm not aware of any plan to phase that out. So if there is going to be submittal of documents in that fashion, then I would imagine there would probably, there'd need to be some effort to standardize along the lines of what I heard on the question, which way they're getting submitted and all that. As far as using the system itself and the degree to which information can be submitted that way, that will be standardized, from a user perspective.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's good. Again, these are assumptions, but I would assume a single system would have a standardized way of submitting data.
Yeah. I'm being careful because, we're still in a discovery journey here with the ICs and OHP in the project.
Right.
So some of these things have been talked about internally, but not the whole group in the project. So there's discussions to be had about these kinds of issues.
Totally fair.
Yeah.
One more?
Okay, how often will arches get refreshed? How will it be updated once Farallon's contract is up? Who will be managing and maintaining the arches platform? Who is adding to it?
You want me to? Well, so currently, as has been said, we have a contractor on board for the course of this system implementation project. It's my belief, things being what they are today with resources available and such in the department, that we would have to have an ongoing contract to conduct the arches configuration and direct maintenance. The Department of Parks and Recreation will continue to host the system and maintain the infrastructure that supports it. And that won't be a contracting effort.
That won't be, that'll be internal.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Okay. Plans change.
They do, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that one's we'll see how that goes.
No, thank you.
Okay, there are 3 more bulleted items on this submittal. Keep going?
Sure.
Okay. I'm hearing that all available digital data will be housed in the Arches platform. What about the non-digital data, like the data at the EIC and parts of San Bernardino County at the SCCIC? Will there be an effort to digitize these paper maps?
I think right now the priority for the contract, which is short, is the data we just talked about. I don't know that there's been any decision yet. You can correct me.
No, I don't want to speak for OHP directly either, but the scope of the project is this available CRIS data will be in the system. That's a top priority actually for the whole thing. Obviously, I have to be able to maintain it and use it as well to keep it vital and relevant. If there's a parallel effort to digitize, that would be going on separate from the project, and then we would bring in that information as it's digital later, or if it's available during the course of the project.
Right. Okay.
But there is an overarching goal to digitize. Period. That's what started when I was contract.
Yeah.
That will continue on. So the answer to the question, short answer is yes, but not in this contract.
Can we stop there and move back to here? I just want to make sure we get everything in, and then we can go back to questions, if that's okay.
I'll keep this one open.
Thanks. Brian, you had something.
It's question / piggyback, and only to just say in my mind as we're talking about digitization and data, it's good to put a little bit more in there on those terms. So for folks that aren't aware, it does say in this paper report a little bit, but we have tabular data at the ICs as part of this project. We have tabular data at the OHP as part of this project. So attributes about the things, the resources, and the performance. We have a lot of documents, so we're scanning those at both the OHP and the ICs to, quote, digitize those documents. So sometimes when folks say digitize, they just, in my mind, jump right to maybe the PDF scanning of part of it. And then we also have the location that needs to be taken from paper map and created in the spatial. And then they need to be linked up together. And so as we've been hearing about the project delivery, its goal is to get the available, what's there now, that's in those three components at their stages, into this next system. So as we're thinking about digital data, that's not what we're talking about, is that sense of the documents, the location, and put more robust attributes in that, and bringing them together to the single system, or whatever it's named. And so data is kind of the door with three legs. Digitization, it could be scanning something, it could be doing data entry, or it could be mapping.
Thanks, Brian. I'm gonna get back to the report now. I thought that was a great back and forth, a lot of good questions. We knew we weren't gonna be able to answer all of them, but we were hoping that we got Joe described it, and we'll bring it back and we'll try to get some answers back to the community. All right, so this correlates to 3A3. What are the steps to get full integration, and what is left to achieve full integration? Are we going to define full integration, or we're going to do the best we can with the information in the report? And I'm reading this verbatim. First, it is important to define full integration of documents, data, and GIS into the single system. So number one, it requires all reports, records, and correspondence available as 300 dots per inch grayscale, not the tonal. Or full color optical character recognized OCR. Portable data files, which are the PDFs. All resources will have a master resource record PDF containing the chronological document history of the resource. Number two, all resource core data fields are data entered and each report is provided an ID number. The ICs and OHP will reference the resources they document with the report number. All resources and reports are represented in geographic information system layers. The resource layer will clearly delineate each resource's evaluated components. Number four, all data are verified, have proper security, and confidentiality measures will be completed. User agreements will be in place. The mobile app development will be completed. So OHP says full integration tasks for the single system inventory includes the following. Since 2020, most of OHP's program submissions have come in electronically, meeting CRIS digital standards. Most registration program submissions have either been scanned in-house by the National Park Service or the National Archives, meeting CRIS digital standards. Since 2002, most project review submissions resulting in a determination of eligibility or ineligibility, which is the DOE, evaluation have been scanned. Pre-2002 project review submissions resulting in a determination of eligibility that have been scanned meet the digital standards. However, project review resource records scans completed for most local government surveys during 1998 to 2002 used lower standards like 100 to 150 DPI or color. Each resource record was limited to only 3 photos, so an unknown portion of photos weren't scanned. In my view, this is just the legacy of that data. It's a little antiquated, it doesn't meet standards, and so it's good to understand from a priority standpoint what's easy and what's harder based on the state of the data, the condition of it. That's my interpretation of that section. Most OHP documents are organized by program submission, not record. When a program activity evaluates a resource, the submissions documents, the evaluations, and the evaluated resources get linked using evaluation activity ID. This means that if multiple resources are evaluated by a submission, the documentation is organized and labeled around the program evaluation rather than by the resource. In the integrated digital system, the documents will be accessible by resource, report, project, and/or location. The effort to get reports digitally, the scanning of the PDFs, will be shared between the OHP and the ICs to reduce duplication of records. And I think this is a critical piece here because a lot of the conversations I've had over the year have to, or include reliance on redundant data. 6 site records for a single site recorded over time as that site moves, as archaeologists with 2 sets of different eyes show up and record it differently because they couldn't find the original DPR form, things like that. So reconciliation at the user level is labor intensive. And as a result, I think a big piece of this is trying to address that at the construction phase of the system as they move the data in hopes of reducing that risk of redundant records and having to sort what's right and what's not. There's a subheading here called data. Resource records containing primary record, which is a DPR 523A form, and location map, which is a 523J, will receive a primary number based on the resource's county location. Resource records including a primary record, an archaeological site record, a location map, and a sketch map, or, in the case of a linear property, a primary record, a linear record, feature record, and a location map will receive a trinomial based on the resource's county location. Resource records for a resource located within multiple counties will be assigned a primary number and trinomial as appropriate, specific to each county. OHP resources data identifies public versus confidential. OHP's data captures multiple resource identifiers, including primary number, trinomial, names, identifiers assigned by other agencies, and recorders doing field work. Locational data includes tabular data of United States Geological Survey coordinates, public land survey system data, and so forth. Other fields include recordation, historic attributes, ownership type, architectural style, resource associations, age ranges. OHP's most important data set is for resource evaluations. So we had some communication, we had some dialogue around some of those data sets and some of those attributes in our last conversation. This is, I guess, just documenting what we were asking about in a different way. Historically, OHP tracked program, which is project review, tax certification, nomination, or local government survey submissions rather than by resource. Submissions are assigned evaluation activity IDs, as mentioned above. When a program activity evaluates a resource, the submission, its evaluations, and resources get linked using evaluation activity ID. This means that if multiple resources are evaluated by a submission in the documentation, the documentation is organized and labeled around the program evaluation rather than by the resources. So this is some of the stuff that happens in OHP that users of the CRIS might not be totally accustomed to or understand, but please note that data from OHP will be put into this system as well, so it's important to define that process also. Report data includes confidentiality status, the title, author, publication date, association with OHP evaluation activity, ID, and identify the resources documented in the report. Upon conclusion of the year-long grant contract, it is anticipated that 100% of the data will not be integrated into the system. Because of this, after this first phase of implementation of the ARCHES system, the OHP and the ICs will continue to share the management of the CRIS through full implementation. So all hands on deck. Subheading GIS. Layers will be separate, confidential resources from those publicly accessible. The system should be able to incorporate GIS from various sources. The system will allow for georeferencing resources for mapping. After vetting, GIS shapes can be imported into the system and the shapes will be exportable. The resource will be mapped in Geographic Information System with a clear delineation of the resource's evaluated components. Full integration also incorporates the inclusion of OHP workflows including project review, tax credit, registration, local government, CLG, for which Office of Historic Preservation Tracking and Inventory System, OTIS, is used now. All right. That ends that section. There was a lot of information here that somewhat answered some of the questions before. A lot of good information on the details. So it does kind of get into the weeds of it. It started broad, but clearly there's a concerted effort to include not only the CRIS data, but OHP data. That's what a centralized system is. It's a comprehensive system at a state level. The phasing is pretty important because this effort, as we all know, has been occurring for a long time. And so being realistic, I imagine about what can be accomplished through the initial contract and what will require hands-on deck to move forward is also an important way of describing how to keep momentum on this effort. I'm kind of talking out of my place. I'd like to bring Eric in, who sounds like he's got some comments.
No, actually, I believe you skipped one paragraph.
Did I? I'm sorry.
The last paragraph before the GIS header.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sorry.
That's all.
No, let me drop that in there. The largest and most intensive component for integration will be reconciling the resources, removing duplicate database records. That's a really important paragraph. Thanks. Linking the resource records in one database to the other, linking the reports and records to the one system resource record, identifying what records reports that aren't digital, and identifying the best record report when there are multiple copies. Thanks, man. That made my day.
And we have a related question.
Sure, Amy, go ahead.
Who will be assuring that the same resource will not be uploaded more than once? Once we start uploading to one database, will there be an issue with several people uploading what they think is a new site instead of an update to the DPR? And by that, I think they mean the DPR form.
So is there a protocol for catching redundant trinomials or p numbers or something like that? From a mechanic standpoint, I'm guessing we don't know that yet.
Well, I wouldn't be the best one to answer in detail, but there are protocols in place now, and which of course are not perfect, but I would believe that similar protocols would carry forward with the new system. Maybe we can automate some things more, maybe, but that remains to be seen. So I guess the answer is yes, and it kind of has to be that way. And we've learned from the current practices and past practices what works well and what doesn't. I say we in a big collective way, not me personally.
Got it.
I mean, on that question, I know there's more to come, but really the question is, what prevents duplicate records for the exact same site, and what prevents a less, data filled, record, overriding record that has more data, basically erasing. Is that?
I'm welcome to input from those who do versus those who know a little bit from higher up. But
yeah, I'm not asking for your answer on this.
I would say that prevent is a strong word. I mean, there's going to be the possibility of things occurring, but it's between the spatial data and the descriptive data and the dates on the submittals, whether coming digitally or paper, and the people in the offices who at some level get a chance to review it. I mean, that's just where that will occur. And Brian may want to say something about the IC approach, or Joseph. If I covered it good enough, then I have it.
Presumably, issue primary trinomial numbers to site.
Yeah, a lot of this is, it's great conversation, because managing expectations and timelines is probably the most important facet that's still within this room. As that paragraph that got reread, the largest and most, sorry, Andrew, you got taken classes on. Most intensive component for integration will reconcile the resources. That level of effort devoted to that task compared to what are we going to use come October is a great question for us all to consider where our pain points are. So that's all I'll say to that. The efforts to reconcile have been undergoing serious efforts for 15, 20 years, I think, in the information centers, because I've been one of them. They've been ongoing efforts to reconcile and create a single inventory behind the scenes. The Additionally, a lot of the status information has already been linked to the primary numbers with unit activity. So a large part of this is there. It's good news. But, you know, we want to fix it all, make it perfect. With some great prior risk coordinator that didn't acknowledge that they were a prior risk coordinator frequently tell me, you know, something not perfect getting in the way of something usable.
Right.
But anyway.
No, thank you thank you both for that. For CRIS users, data reconciliation has been an ongoing effort. It's California. We've got a lot of data. There's a lot of activity in the field, and I think reconciliation is going to continue long after this system is established. It might be at a lesser degree. So a lot of the questions we're asking today will fall within varying degrees of effort. I think the single system, one of the value adds for it is to reduce that effort of reconciliation. It's to reduce that effort of submission and resubmission and re-editing and the child processes that have sprung up over the last 2 decades as we try to submit data and be good stewards. So single system is meant to address those things. Is it going to correct it all in one shot? No, but we're further along than we ever have been, and that's why we take the optimistic approach with this effort that having a contract and a budget and a schedule and scope is just, I couldn't sleep last night, man. I was excited. It's great. Yeah.
I just wanted to agree with what Brian said. Going to this project before the contract was awarded and the contractor's in agreement, one of the biggest concern is this whole process of extract, transfer, load, and what that entails, and the degree to which we don't know things about how that's going to go yet, and then we're going to have to make decisions about how clean we want the data or how complete it needs to be in the system, and the level of effort. So just emphasizing that is a huge component to this project, no matter how you slice it, and so it will be driving a lot of things, you know, for a good bit of the project.
Great. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Oh, Amy, yes, please.
Returning to the previous list of questions, the next is, what will the fee schedule look like, especially if we have a hybrid between digital data and non-digital data like San Bernardino County? With a sub-question, is there a better way to get cost estimates up front without having to do the record search before knowing how much it costs?
So short star answers the question. I can tell you that there's no information in here on how the fee schedule will be structured. Jody, has there been any discussion at an OHP level?
We know that we need to do that, but we're not at that stage.
So we are not at that stage yet. There's a number of different ways it can happen. I think benchmarking with different states and different systems across the country. There are subscription services, there's pay-as-you-go, there's free. I don't think ours will be free. But it will need to be talked about, and the pricing structure is under the purview of the State Historical Resources Commission, so I have a feeling we'll be a part of that conversation.
Another question, and I apologize if you already covered this while I was changing gears. Will we still have to deal with individual information centers?
I don't know what deal with means. But there is also no conversation on what the individual information centers will do, say, or how they will operate with the system in place. I know that all hands on deck to put data into the system means that they need a lot of support, but that's not a part of this effort right now, any of those decisions.
And one last question on this email. Also, how do we get on the list so Farallon reaches out to us as part of the user community?
Well, I don't know that Fairlawn has that scope in their contract, which is part of what today is about. So I'm not managing the contract, but I can tell you that from a workshop and commission perspective, if we vote on to stand up a committee on the CRIS, I'd like to find a way of maybe creating a liaison role or some form of outreach where we could bring questions back to them. I don't know if that's possible, but that's what we'll talk about in the latter half of this meeting. Good for now? Cool. Anything else from the table? Yes?
So it sounds to me from the discussion me as reading this out loud, which I think is helpful, that really the focus of the effort now and the discussion before, or the question came up, what was the question earlier about digital? I think right now it looks like we're talking scanned digital documents almost exclusively right now. Is that true, Eric? Maybe with some resource attributes added.
There's plenty of data of the tabular type that Ryan was talking about.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask too, that, the HRI that people rely on for, previous surveys that have been done, and that's tabular as well. And it's not, everything is not a DPR, but it's an extraction of the main fields, style, address. So that will be put into it at this point too.
Yeah, it's my understanding that that's all CRIS data. If it's resources in what we'll call the CRIS inventory and it's in the system right now, it can be brought in, Whether the data types that Ryan was talking about.
Yeah.
Locations, tabular,
Okay. I guess one of my main points would be and I'm sure this is way ahead of time, but make sure the public understands what is and what isn't in this. Because I know from working in the field for 30 years, that a lot of people look at the HRI and think if it's not in there, it's not important. And there's billions of other sources, well, maybe not billions, but a lot of other sources of information that are not included in the HRI. So just to make sure that people understand what exactly is in there, and it's not really a statewide inventory. I guess is my point. It's a statewide inventory of a limited data set.
Anything else? All right. This heading kind of relates to 3A2, still digitization, which we've talked about a lot today, but we've got one more page on it, and the heading here is, what is the full status of the IC digitization currently, and what remains to be digitized at the ICs and at OHP? What are the real numbers? So the state of the data is what the commission had asked about. We would receive reports on a CRIS report out during commission meetings, and we would get percentages of certain things, but there was a lot of detail involved, and so we were asking, what is the state of the data so that we can make informed decisions on the pricing structure for the CRIS, which was something we vote on. And so this is the response. Information about the data sets used to complete record searches has been received from 6 of the 9 information centers. For the ICs that provided information between November 1, 2023 and January 4, 2024, the data sets that are included in the information center database, the ICDB, and are largely digitized are typically the following. Resource and report data from legacy hard copy 7.5-minute USGS topographic quadrangles, including shape files and resource records and reports. These are digitized, databased, and entered into GIS. Resource data received digitally, including shape files and resource records, resources, databased, and entered into the GIS. Report data received digitally, including shape files and reports, databased, and entered into GIS. Informal resources that lack associated documents but are mapped and referenced in reports. National Register of Historic Places listed resources, digitized, databased, and entered into GIS. National Historic Landmark resources, digitized, databased, and entered into GIS. California Register of Historical Resources listed resources, digitized, databased, and entered into GIS. State Historic Landmark resources, digitized, databased, and entered into GIS. And last is state places, points of historical interest resources, which are also digitized, databased, and entered into GIS. In addition to the materials above, some ICs have scanned historic maps that are not in the GIS portion of the Information Center database, but are provided as part of record search requests. Information that some ICs provide as part of their service when filling record search requests include additional sources not in the database, such as ethnographic data, geologic, soil and aerial imagery, bridge surveys, and local histories. They also may provide links to additional online resources such as GLO maps or Sanborn fire maps. There is always data in process, including non-verified GIS data from recent accessioning and digitizing projects. These data in process efforts may take from 3 to 12 months depending on the amount and the verification of efforts needed. There are also hard copy and digital reports and records submitted but not yet processed into the database, GIS, PDF library. The backlog ranges from a couple of weeks to up to 6 months. Lastly, additional backlog includes the unprocessed reports sent by OHP, which need scanning, digitization, database attributes assigned, and GIS files. Unsorted paper materials sent in by retiring professionals or from professionals' estates, and paper reports and research records from local agencies during project review between 1970 and 2000. The ARD and BERD are typically not incorporated into the Information Center database. The ARD is the Archaeological Resource Database, by the way, and the Built Environment Resource Database, and we have a section on that on the next page. So my takeaway is that there are a lot of data, and some of it is in various stages of processing for this effort, but the effort has already prioritized those important data sets needed to plan work in the state. When record searches are performed, they look at a lot of the things that are listed here. Is that going to be in the system ultimately? I'd like to think so, but we're going to triage what can be done now. I'm injecting myself and I shouldn't, I'm just reading this, but it feels like we've got a lot of great information on what this effort is meant to do and the prioritization to do it. So the data isn't going anywhere, it just might not be in the system for a bit because there are priorities, other data sets that have to get in there first. Any questions on that section from the table? None? From the room? Thoughts? Amy from the gallery? No? Okay. Thank you. A little bit more. There's some additional paragraphs to that last section that I'll get to right now. It is not uncommon for the ICs to have incomplete data sets for resources and reports on federal lands or on areas subject to federal oversight. It is difficult to quantify the status of digitization and compare the amount that is already in the Information Center database and what remains to be digitized because the widgets may not match. For instance, it is hard to know how many records in the database correlate with how many boxes of documents that still need to be digitized. Additionally, the ICs indicate that there is an issue of workload capacity and having to put aside their record searches to gather quantifiable information. For OHP, please see attachment 2, OHP Document Inventory Assessment from January 2024, updated on the 10th, that same year. Digitization spreadsheet, including an estimate of resources contained in the 307 linear executive order files. So, I mean, I think the ICs are putting a concerted effort together to clean things up. And that effort has to be triaged with work coming in versus work that's already been submitted that's got to be printed, right? If they had 20 people working there, it would go faster at each IC, but that's not the case. I do have a question regarding the 6 versus 9. So there are 3 ICs that did not submit data as part of this list of questions, and so I'm not looking for an answer right now, but maybe we can find out what the statuses of the other 3. We're going to move on to the last part of agenda item 3A, which is the ARD and the BRD status update. Will the archaeological resource database and the built environment resource database be updated as part of the single system effort or after the single system contract is completed? The bird and ARD are derived from the single Otis database at OHP. So any limitations to including the data from these databases into the single system is based on workload capacity and any data scrubbing that needs to be done during the ETL, including adding GIS shapefiles. The OHP is anticipating that the data from the ARD and from the BPRD will be available in the new single system upon contract conclusion, especially if additional help with the effort can be obtained. Updates will occur as part of the inclusion of the data in the single system, and as mentioned above, the timing of completion is reliant on data scrubbing and inclusion of shapefiles. Last question is, how might a state historical resource commission committee interface with the single system effort? And that will be the next topic in this workshop. So that is it for the report. Questions from the table? From the room? Amy? No? Thoughts? Last conclusion? Sure.
I'm just wondering, again, I was a practitioner in the field for many years, and I did built environment surveys that I never submitted to the information center. So, are there stated requirements anywhere? I know people are much more likely to submit archaeological records. And I don't know, is that the basis for actually the beginnings of the information centers? But, is there professional standards that people are supposed to follow to submit records to the information centers consistently? And I think really moving forward, so you make sure you get data. But that's what I was also talking about. Do you want data from every city survey now? I mean, what exactly are you?
You're looking at me, so I'll answer. What do you want?
To be clear, and that's where, we have come from a round up in the state of California in our information management of our resources. We started at the archaeological level at various clearinghouses over time. Mid-90s, it all comes together. And that's really what we're talking about, is picking up that primary EBR 523A effort. The manual, the 1995 manual, is still our Bible. So, at the NWIC, and I can really only speak, and I'll pivot to the OHP, if you will, find out about are there standards for submitting to the CRIS. I mean, some local governments within our 18 counties do require individuals to submit to the CRIS, no matter what resource type they are dealing with in their CEQA processes. They have to get an email confirming from the information center as part of their project clearance. But that's a CEQA level, so the OHP may not have a statutory role in that process per se, but the local government wants that information in the clearinghouse. We view the effort of getting the built environment resource directory, which includes all those surveys and the NatReg and all that stuff, into the primary system, so it has that same report. So yes, everybody should send all their EBR forms, no matter what resource type they are, to the information centers that you get put in that clearinghouse. But I can't really answer your first part because
It's not my role. Yeah, it's not really enforceable unless it's
Right.
in the contract or.
And that's
Exactly.
why some people have that hook where they want to see that, end up in the NIC. And we get a lot of materials at the information center across the state. Now, to take that discussion across the state, there is workflow, if you will, where 106 projects go through reviewing compliance and then work their way to the information centers. This system will improve that workflow. We all can't wait for that. But the inventories, the HRI should have primary numbers because they're in that built environment resource room.
Yeah, I'm just thinking in cases, again, like Los Angeles, where they've done a giant survey, and they have their own database.
Well, that's been going on forever with other local, certified local government processes. And, stay out of that one too, at the information center. We manage the primary number systems, encourage everybody to submit one of them to the state to get a primary number so we can reconcile the primary resource directory so everybody can gain access to it.
Yeah, just thinking long-term again, explaining to the public what actually is in here and what other sources of information you may need to also check. You're doing your due diligence and see if the property's ever been surveyed or reported.
I think a lot of the professional communities, and I love here having this in their ethics statements.
Yeah.
So.
If I understand your question correctly, to my knowledge, there's nothing in state law or federal law that says that you can submit the state. There's no statutory requirement. Counties, what Brian's talking about, if that was your question. If archaeologists, what you just said, archaeologists doing more, because when the archaeologist goes to the information center and says, hey, can I get a record search? They sign an agreement that says, yes, I will give the data back to the IC. That's the reason why the data gets populated back into the IC when I go out and do a survey, right? Because I have signed an agreement that I commit myself to doing that. It's a handshake agreement, and if I don't follow through on my part of the agreement, Brian's not going to give me continued access to the IC because I haven't followed through on my part. Does that answer your question?
It does answer my question.
Yeah, submitting data back in is a condition of the use agreement that they have, right? It says so in there, so.
Yeah, it's not in statute that somebody.
Now, a lot of good intentioned consultants submit data outside of that agreement, bless their hearts. You don't need a Chris access use agreement to say they did the information center.
But see, that if you have
Send it.
organizations that have their own databases that are free access, they don't want to pay to go to Chris to access that.
I would say you don't have to pay to submit it, just to submit it.
But I mean, even if they're gonna do research, they're gonna go to the city's database that has all that same information.
That's the inherent tension in how the system has evolved over time. Yeah.
Right. And for a while, there was more labor put into data coming in, which doesn't create revenue for the IC, and data going out, which does. So it's a little inversely proportional there. You can't sustain that from a business perspective. A couple of questions I had. We talked about the use agreement briefly just now, and it did say that we would have a use agreement, but there's also an operations manual, and if the nature of the CRIS is going to change to more of an online platform where perhaps all the data you need is there, will there be a revision to the manual and the use agreement that reflects the new system? And what should that include? And the reason why I'm asking is that long before I was here, the commission voted on the manual. And so there's purview there, and I don't know, it doesn't say specifically in the Public Resource Code that the State Historical Resources Commission will vote on the operations manual for the CRIS, but there was a correlation made with that at some point. So I think from a commission standpoint,
It says that the commission sets the standard for this, creates the database, right? That's what.
it maintains the inventory. Yeah, we're responsible for the inventory, and so taking that and saying, now we're gonna vote on a manual that says how we're gonna do that. I mean, somebody made that connection, I think it's fine. I just wanna know if that's something that falls within our purview. Let's talk about what those new controlling documents will be as part of this effort. And I'm saying that because at the infancy of this contract, we wanna think about that stuff now rather than getting done with it, be like, oh, maybe we should put a data sharing agreement together or a confidentiality agreement or a stronger confidentiality component of the use agreement, especially if it's going to be online. So those are things that I jotted down as I was reviewing this material, is that the operations manual and the user agreement, when you talk to some of the IC coordinators, they felt like there was a lot of teeth in it, and Ron, maybe you could reshape that messaging for me, like for people who are not doing what the agreement says, They're shrugging it off because they didn't put it in their contract, it's not part of their budget, and they can't come. So how do we ensure proper participation moving forward, right? Everyone has to be accountable to this new system. For it to work, we all need to work together and follow the new standards that will be created. And I think that's how you end up with a successful system. It's built and fed by the user community. The functionality of the mechanics will be done with everybody in this room. And I feel like we should all consider ourselves somewhat owners of it as we move forward. That's the best way to ensure proper cooperation.
I don't know, we're taking that back to the question, right?
Yes.
The commission.
Please.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is that 46% of the state is public lands, federal lands. It's a big piece. National Parks, Bureau of Land Management, and the Forest Service have different units that might not have all submitted to the CRIS over time. As part of this effort, if there is a data standard, if there is a schema that we know will be used, and maybe it's one that's already created, maybe there will be tweaks to it, as those 3 federal agencies are looking at their data over time, it might behoove all of us to give that standard out and make that almost a sub-process to say, if we're doing this at the state level, maybe it's time that other super data managers are doing it also, and perhaps there's a point in time when we could have full state integration. Right now, there are a number of federal agencies that would require a CRIS record search, and then you have to go into their office and look at their files because it's maintained separately. And that's just a symptom of the system over time, right? Pointing fingers and complaining about the different ways these additional processes and databases have been created over time it's necessity. So, but we're past that now. We're looking at the future, and I think anything we can do from a contractual perspective to help people who have held on to data and used it for managing their lands, either under 110 or whatever it is, I'd like to see more of a collaboration there. And I don't know what that looks like from this effort, but I want to put it on record that it would be great if the future also included that. That's all we have for agenda item 3A, unless Amy, there were additional questions that came in.
Adam,
Yes, sir.
I have a question, going back to Janet's question about how many reports of different cities or whatever are required to or not required to go into CRIS. Maybe it's a question for the next portion of our meeting, but how important is that? Does the lack of that requirement really undercut the usefulness overall of CRIS, or is that going to be a major issue? I just put that out.
From a user's perspective, the reason I go to the CRIS is to know what has been previously recorded so that I can properly scope my effort, and also I don't re-record something that's already been recorded. And I go and, do an update. What is its current condition? And is my project going to affect it?
So something people have been working on might be in the city of Bakersfield, but not in CRIS. The information might not.
Correct.
And that is bad for you.
Well, it means that I'm gonna re-record something that, the city has in their archives, and if I'm a good architectural historian, I know where to look for that thing, right? So, sorry if I overstepped here.
It's great.
That was great.
Yeah.
Before we move to 2, I mean, 3, fill that speaker cards, you've been pretty vocal, but just to close this group, I mean, Joseph, Anne Marie, and Brian, any more comments? So we can,
All right. Next piece.
Number 2.
Number 2, CRIS committee, discussion and action. So the State Historical Resources Commission has roles and responsibilities dictated by Public Resource Code. When the report gets posted, you'll see that there are some definitions on federal law, historic properties, state law, historical resources and inventory. Under state law, it states that the SHRC shall do all of the following: conduct a statewide inventory and maintain comprehensive records of historical resources pursuant to state and federal law, including but not limited to historical landmarks, points of historic interest, etc. So it's just an example that there are public resource codes that provide the commission with certain purview over pieces of this effort. And we had asked if a committee should be stood up, what is their responsibilities? What could we do? Because you've heard the stakeholders, contracts in place, the finest minds are working on this. Can we contribute? Or would we just be getting in anyone's way? Which happens also. And so I guess at this point, we should have a discussion on, is a committee a good idea? And what would be the roles and responsibilities of that committee? And Katie is counsel, she's here to help us navigate through legal waters in making sure that action, which is a vote on the commission's part, is done well and right. So I guess I'll start with the question, is a committee a good idea? And are there any comments on that?
Yes, in light of the effort that's going on for the next, until October, would it not be prudent to have a committee? So if there are issues that come up that require at least input of the commission, the committee is in place between our quarterly board meetings, being proactive.
I agree.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Question is probably to Jody. As part of your staff, do you have a dedicated Chris coordinator?
We do have a risk coordinator, and that's my member out of our office. We also have Joseph McDowell, who works, with the OHP data and with the IMU. I am like the focal point for OHP for the efforts and kind of quarterly pull things together. We work very closely with Eric Allison, who is the contract manager, project manager for DPRIT and for this effort. And I did want to make a comment that yes, the contract ends in October, but the effort is going to continue, beyond that point. So the committee, committee's responsibility, how we should continue beyond that.
Because in my mind, it conjures up many different styles of interaction or ways of interacting with something that maybe my co-congress here don't agree with me. This is not something that the commission needs to be on top of every day. It's not quarterly reports from the coordinator might be enough. And it saves us creation of thinking streamlining here. There's also the fact that right now, you all don't know this and don't care, but this is a highly, compared to where we were 6 years ago, now we're a fairly informed committee in terms of Chris. We're all expired. So this commission might change a lot. So it argues for having a very active coordinator. Like speaking out of church.
I don't think so. I haven't thought on that. When we were getting quarterly updates, there was some information missing when we would ask for it, and that was based on a status quo of the Chris candidates data. The fact that we're changing the status quo and we're entering into this transitional period, for me, suggests that there's more than just a regular update that could be provided. Because there's more information now. This is actually a lot more information. And the Chris update at a commission meeting would not just be the status of the data anymore per IC. It would be the status of the transition. It would be the status of perhaps the contract, then it would be a lot more information to then share. So if it were a year or two ago, I would agree with you 100%. There's really not a lot to share. There's not a lot for us to respond to. And I feel like that's changed.
Yeah, I'll make a comment on that. I agree. Years ago, we had a committee, and I think it was very successful. I think with this contract, only going until October, and I know there will be ongoing efforts, but we're only going to meet twice between the end of the contract. So I think OHP is clearly leading this, but I think a subcommittee could be complementary to the efforts of this contract. So I would encourage a small subcommittee be formed to complement the subcommittee.
If I can, I would just support that, if nothing else, to show that the commission is interested, that we realize that we have a role here, and we don't want to get in the way, but at the same time, we want to be ready to assist if we can.
The makeup of the committee, there's a really big difference between with how many people would be a part of the committee, right? Can you maybe provide us with the difference between a committee that has 2 people and then more than 2 people?
Sure, it's pretty simple. There's more than 2 people, you have to reflect on that, that are agenda, meeting, provide agenda. Any subcommittee will still need to meet the entire commission in order to take action. So most committees will still do the information gathering, study, but, to the earlier point, the commission does need to adopt procedures from the employers, so that will be an action that we need to be by the entire commission. But yeah, so just to answer your question, though, a committee of 2 commissioners is not required to
Adam, I guess for me, whether or not we have the first committee or subcommittee depends on answering B3, what are the duties of that committee, right? So if we can begin to address that, then we can establish whether or not it's necessary beyond the confines of this committee. Go
I know Brian has a lot of great ideas on that. I think my initial thought was a 2-person committee to avoid the back team requirements is definitely something we want to do. If we had to publicly notice these conversations, we wouldn't get very far. And then we're in this kind of critical point where outreach, I think, is important. And from the responsibility of the committee, I think, would be to work with the Society for California Archaeology and perhaps have conversations with the CRIS coordinators and even bring information to them from OHP so that there's a 2-way street on information and updates. And I don't know what that necessarily would include, but I think just an outreach in both directions to serve as a conduit or crosswalk between the stakeholders that are going to be busy doing this great work and the community that will be the recipient of that is something we could probably provide in one way or another. That just means you're getting on the phone a lot, you're emailing, and we do that already. So I don't think it's a big lift, and I think it's something that might be beneficial, like you were saying, at least while this contract is in place, and then perhaps we revisit the responsibilities after and see, is there a need to continue with those types of outreach and updates? That was my vision of what that means.
Would a subcommittee or committee benefit either the users or the folks at the NCs would benefit? Would that be something that would be attractive to have access to 2 people? Let's say it's 2 people to begin to bounce ideas or to inform in between these quarterly meetings. That's something that others would be interested in.
And you're asking me, the operations manual in its current format has always been discussed as something other than kind of administrative changes to the operations manual. Administrative changes can be handled by the OHP level, but we've always been told the rest of that manual needs to come through commission. To be able to work with a couple of commissioners, I think the IC coordinators would enjoy that because we might be able to update a manual that's severely outdated. A lot of the
it's been updated through attachments, if you will, and other standards that have been approved through the beginning of it with the series of standards. Updating that manual. Additionally, it provides a conduit for the other user communities. I'm not 100% confident that every user, if you will, type will show up and advocate for themselves via YouTube. There's professional foresters that use the CRIS system on a daily basis, members of the public, tribal individuals, planners, different types of record searches that are discussed in this manual. I see that.
And for me, that would be the reason to form a subcommittee. That benefits the folks that are in the weeds every day, working it out, digitizing this new system, users that we all have jobs and have nothing to do with this until we convene as a committee. So to me, that would be very important. So what you said.
I can say that if your contractor Fairlawn had a question about how is the user community gonna deal with whatever we're trying, I know with one email, I could get you a dozen people who would beta test whatever that question is.
Right.
If we have to go through bad routine and do all this, that is, as you said earlier, would slow down everything. So if you want to be nimble and flexible, a committee is the way to do it. Understanding that the committee doesn't make any decisions,
Right.
it just collects information to bring to the full commission, right?
Sounds good.
So if we wanted to keep it at 2 people, before we make a motion, that would define what that committee would look like. Do we want to identify who that would be, Katie, or how does that
As
work?
a chair would be appointed.
Right, so we as a commission vote to establish a committee. I appoint.
And then you appoint. Okay.
Yeah, that's why he's the chair.
So don't ever go back at the same time.
So you want to make a motion? I'd like to make a motion to form a CRIS committee to do everything Renee just said. No, to serve as liaison between this effort and the user community and be in a information gathering support role.
I do have one question. How then, perhaps this is to you, how then would this subcommittee inform the larger committee? And when would that happen? Yes.
At the commission meetings, we would then really look at the agenda item, we would have a committee of
We agendize it, right?
It does. I might ask you to start that voting over next so much. It was a interruption.
Yeah, I agree.
I might interrupt again.
I'll make a
If
motion
you
to.
think this effect may, or this effort may be able to.
I'll do it very clearly, yeah. I make a motion to form a CRIS committee. Period.
Maybe describe it
To gather information and report back to the State Historical Resources Commission.
We have a second.
Second.
Yeah.
Adams.
Aye.
Friends. Oh, you say whether you're aye.
Yeah,
And he spoke for now.
Yes.
Adam spoke for Adam.
Oh,
Because, yeah, you don't know, sorry.
Cancel. Aye. Hess.
Aye.
Hoyers.
Aye.
Sedero.
Aye.
Palumbo.
Aye.
Motion carries.
So now that we are interested, I believe I can assume. I don't want this part. Are there any others that would like to be part of this?
Just need one other person.
Adam Sirkowski is expressed interest.
Just a comment, I think it should be something that's familiar with the system enough to ask ask pertinent questions or when they get information, understand them. So I would encourage anyone on this commission who issues the system, they would be a great addition to this committee.
Grease in the skids. Love it.
I volunteer.
Anybody else interested? Okay. So then, as chair, I appoint Adam to the chair and Jen as. Thank you.
Yes, Katie, this is a question for you all. The committee cannot necessarily make an independent decision representing the whole commission. If during this process, there was some concerns voiced to the committee, can they at least say, yeah, we don't think you need to go any farther with this? You know, again, not give advice, but just, no, don't worry about it, move forward, that's not something that has to come before the commission. Can they at least give that kind of information back?
I think the committee reports to staff, for the agenda.
Good, so, any other questions, comments from the commission? Yeah. Since we have such a small group, any other comments from the audience?
If you have committees, when I think back, I heard of the ice packing. We're in a committee, I don't know all the ups, downs, lefts or rights, but if there's any lessons learned as a body, you've had a commission committee before that worked with the information centers, provided advice on their procedural.
ISPAC is the Information Center Procedural Advisory.
Is that it? Thank you. I think, right, apology, I didn't know the whole acronym, so I'm
Yeah.
fine. But
That was the last.
that was the old one, yeah, you were much better news.
And elements were.
Lessons learned, okay, and I don't know what happened and why that commission stopped being, committee rather stopped being in existence. I think, given the relationship between the SHRC and the IC and the OHP, I think it's a valuable committee to have. And I know that it does take your interests and time, so it maybe speaks to you all stepping forward.
I think this is like 2.0, right? So this will be a different version of that. I think we'll make sure that we're operating under the purview of the commission. I think the ICEPAC there was a lot of great work that came out of that, but I'm not sure that all of that was under the regulatory purview, which is why it may have, I don't know how it went. I just know that everybody tried really hard. And we're gonna try really hard this one, but I'm gonna be jamming, and I will be relying on Katie and Tara, who are our counsel, to make sure that we stay within the guardrails.
Yeah, and the main difference with this one's now is an overarching contract, and so that didn't exist, of course. So. Yeah.
Jody, before we conclude, can you read what you had scribbled down during this? What are the questions that were asked and any actions to bring back?
You asked, training, is that a job, training for
I'm sorry, can you speak?
external users, the training. So Lisa had asked about, how we issue arches, and I believe we answered that, Jen had questions about citywide surveys, and those would be put in the database. Looking at that, but we'll look at that, there, ensure there's a standard for submittal and data input and output. What stakeholders are involved, question about security and confidentiality, we addressed a little bit, but that's more. What is the definition of digitization? Talking about that, but be more specific. And some questions about standardization and how to ensure we have that. The assurance that duplication will not be happening. Let's see. how is the fee system going to be figured out, pricing structure, et cetera. How to get on a list, to be on a list for Carolina to reach out. That's something we have to discuss about how to reach out to external stakeholders. Managing on the status of the ICs that did not provide info on digitization. Janet had asked if there's responsibilities to the risk, we had a big discussion about that. We'll summarize that. The use agreement and about how the changes to the use agreement and perhaps the manual have come. We've had some discussion on that as well. And that was what I.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Guys, thanks again for your.
We have one more question.
Okay.
Will the OHP be sending out progress reports documenting Farallon's progress and the newly formed CRIS committee's progress?
Well, the second part of the question is that the updates will, the committee will be at each mission. But the first part of the question.
I would say that also will be provided in each commission.
Another practical question, is this going to be, and you don't understand, is this going to be like EDR forms that the 1955 or will this be additional, any use of question? Just an additional.
We're looking at it. I imagine that there are some fashions to utilize and how to try to put into the system. Wow. That's part of the looking at this and see what we can invest in. But yes.
Joby, I wasn't sure if this was on your list, but a huge question, what is the definition of digitization?
I did say that.
Sorry.
No, that's good. Well,
All right, one more round. Any questions or comments? You guys, again, thank you so much for attending, for your participation. I thought it was a good discussion. Adam, thank you for leading us. Definitely appreciate that. And Dan, thank you for being on the committee. With that, we'll adjourn at 11:05. You guys have a great day.
Yeah. The tour will be at 2 o'clock and we'll meet at 10th and O Street in front of the California Museum.
One more time, William, what was that?
The tour will take place at 2 o'clock at the entrance of the California Museum. So it's about 3 blocks from here.
Great. Thank you.
Great, thank you.